Hello, welcome back. My name is Arthur Torrington. I'm a director of Windrush Foundation, and this is the second part of an interview with Professor Hedi Mirza. We welcome you back today again.
Thank you.
Okay.
Arthur.
Now, the last time we were talking about your journey up to 1980. You had a young child and a baby, but then you're going to be embarking on education. So, in fact, why did you think of doing education, though, as a subject, as a profession?
Well, education, as I was saying last week, is I suppose the thing that knits my life together. Not only was it historically something that my grandparents and my father were involved in, but also I just knew that education was the way in which we can build a strength and capacity in the Caribbean community. It was the place where we were being attacked the most. There were attacks on our children in terms of their intelligence and their abilities. And that happened to me in schooling. So I knew that that would be the place to be. And I knew that there were the Black Parents movement in the 1970s and into the 80s. And these are very powerful movements where mothers were saying, in particular, the mothers were saying, you know, that our children are being relegated to the lower streams, are being excluded from school, are being told their education is subnormal and put into special schools. So there were forms of incarceration going on through the education system, and that really needed to be exposed.
Yeah, but how did you get that sort of, oomph to challenge that system?
Well, I did a PhD, and I went back to the school where I had been bullied and racially abused for so many years. And I did a study of that school, and it became the book Young Female and Black, which is still used today in schools and still used in the A-level syllabus.
Mm-hmm. And what's in it?
Yeah, well, the school, it's about, as it says, being young, female and black in school in Britain. And I did a study of a group of girls looking at their journey through the British education system. And what I found was that the teachers were very overtly racist. So this would be in the 1980s I had done this study. And they had no compunction about saying that these girls will never amount to anything.
Outright?
Outright.
Right.
And so I document that in the book. But what I found amongst the young women is that they never gave up. They found ways around the system, and I call it the backdoor entry into further and higher education. So they, even though they often left school without their GCSEs or their A-levels because school just wasn't the place for them, they still were highly committed to education. You know, credentials mattered. They'd go on to do a course in a FE college, or, you know, a college course that may be something maybe non-academic, maybe hairdressing or childcare or something, but that was never their aim. Their aim was to do a degree, maybe in social sciences, but they would do that to get onto an access course and then into university. So it might take them maybe 5, 7, 10 years longer, but they'd get there in the end.
But tell me, but do you meet any of those students at all these days, or?
Well, when you do the research, you keep it confidential.
Okay.
So you don't often go back. But what I did do was, after my PhD, I worked at South Bank University, and those people were my students.
The same, some of them anyway?
Not the same
Okay.
actual people, but people like them.
Okay. From that school?
From the communities.
From the community in general?
Would have been from those schools or from...
Mainly South London or where?
Mainly South, well, South Bank is in South London,
yeah.
so they would come from the the community
Okay.
in South London.
So the one thing, I mean, having done that at that stage, so what are you doing now in education?
Well, I became Professor of Race Equality at Middlesex University in the 90s. And that was a moment, the 90s, that kind of opened up a possibility to talk about race openly within the education system. So we had legislation and policies around diversity and equality and multiculturalism. Now those are all bad words. People say that they failed. But in the 90s, it was the kind of zenith, the moment that we could, you know, talk about inequalities in higher education through the schooling system. So I did many studies looking at what is officially called the underachievement of black and brown children. They are not children from Caribbean backgrounds, Pakistani and Bangladeshis. Children were not doing as well in school. And when we looked at all the research, and I got a lot of funding to do different studies, that was clearly evident that they were performing maybe 2 or 3 times less than the white children. And this could only be down to the system, the institutions, the schools in which they were at. Because I knew from all my research that they have a commitment to education. So it wasn't about anything cultural, it has to be institutional.
Indeed. Now, just going back a little, your dad and you came back in the early 70s, and that was a time when the immigration things were changing. Now, was there any kind of a problem? Because today, as you know, there are lots of issues about migration and people not getting their citizenship and nationality. I would think that that didn't affect you and your dad, because you have to come back from Trinidad at that time, and you have to have the right passport.
Yeah, well, I do remember, and I think I still have it somewhere, the original passports that we had, which is British subjects, Commonwealth British subjects. Yeah. And so when my father came, he would have had one of those passports.
Yeah, the original one that said British subject, right. Because that would have been, he would have been using the Nationality Act of 1948. Yes. And so on. It's interesting that he came back then, because there's so much that has happened there since then.
Yeah. So he came, yes. So, but he went back to the Caribbean, and I had. You mean after? Yes, and my brother and I, we had British passports because we travelled back, so we would have had to apply. What has happened is many people did not travel, so they did not see the need to apply. Yes. And in those days, you could just get, if you were going to Europe, you could just get a visitor's pass. So now that the atmosphere, should I say, or the what is it called, the hostile environment, has changed the way that people are being treated, and they are applying the laws retrospectively, so that they're not saying, well, in those times that people had that citizenship, that you cannot carry it forward. They're applying now the acts and the new immigration acts to people who came a long time ago, right, under different conditions and circumstances. Now, in terms of what you're doing now in the community, you're a part of the Windrush generation, as we all are. Yeah. Now, how do you see things at the moment? Looking forward, I think, as I said last week, one of the things that really surprises me is that after working for 30-odd years as an academic, doing research, looking at the racism and the inequalities and issues around immigration and so on, that we are now back to square one. After 30 years of struggle, this hostile environment, so-called hostile environment, the xenophobia and the racism that has driven Brexit has me feeling a little depressed, if I'm honest. In the moment that the Brexit result came out, that day, I was walking along the road near my house, and an elderly white man came up to me on that day and said, "Get back to your country." Now, no one has said that to me in the last 20 years, probably 30 years since I was at school. And yet, people now feel openly, justifiably able to say that.
Mm-hmm. But how do you think we need to challenge that sort of thing?
Well, our politicians are driving the agenda. And, you know, I call it a form of elite racism, because if the powers that be and the media that drives the powers that be and are in conjunction with the powers that be, if they make it acceptable to be racist, then it becomes acceptable. It becomes ordinary, everyday speak to say that, you know, you should go back, you're taking, you're scrounging, this is not your due. There is no historical understanding of the relationship of Britain to the colonies, of enslavement, of indenture, the way that they exploited the lives of other people.
Of people, right. Now, you know, this year will be 70 years after Windrush, and that is remembering the contribution that Caribbean people have been making ever since then, of course, before. So what is your take on that?
On the Windrush 70
well, in terms of celebrating that contribution. I mean, your dad came, your dad contributed, you have contributed. You know, it's a lot of contributions made.
Yeah, I mean, I just think that I know when we were planning, you know, our conversation today, I was saying one of the things about Caribbean people is that we often don't celebrate. We were told to be humble. We're selfie-facing, and yes, we enjoy ourselves, but we don't sing our own praises. And I think the thing about the Windrush is that we should sing our praises, and the multitude of skills and talents that we have in our community is just, you know, astounding. But we don't really have a cohesive picture of that. So you have people in the arts, you have people in academia, you have people in industry. You know, you've got amazing range of areas that people have contributed to. But the only time we hear about the Windrush at the moment is to do with the Windrush scandal, which is all about, you know, illegal immigration. So we're being linked to illegal immigration and not to the positive things that we've done.
Thank you very much, Hedi. It's very great having you. I'm sure we'll get you back again, and now we'll hand you back to Lavina.